Okay, so welcome from my side as well. So just for the people who are new, to give you a little bit of an idea. So we usually give some instructions in the beginning for, I don't know, roughly 20 minutes, a little bit more, a little bit less. And then we meditate for about half an hour. And either before the meditation or after the meditation, as Ariel mentioned, there is opportunity to ask questions. And if you ask and then afterwards you feel you don't want to have it on the recording, we have the person who is editing it here with us, so we can always just take it out. So there is no problem with that at all. Right, so what I wanted to do tonight is I would like to bring us all back to our senses again. But of course that means something else that I'm exactly from what I'm intending to do, but some of you might have been here when I talked about calming the senses last year. It sounds very, very far away when you talk about last year, but actually it was just not the last session I was here, but the one before. So just a quick recap about the senses in Buddhism. We have 6 senses, not just 5. So the 5 that you are familiar with, which is seeing, which is hearing, which is smelling, which is tasting, which is touch. But we also have the mind, and we have cognition. And last time I talked about this, and I wanted to go into kind of more, and I ran out of time. So I already said back then that I would like to focus on hearing a little bit more this time, because it's one of those things that probably most of you have experienced either in day-to-day life, that when hearing happens, that the mind can get agitated or excited by what is happening out there, connected to that hearing, and that's why I wanted to focus on it a little bit. So last time I also emphasized that we have to be aware that there isn't just bare awareness. Awareness is always mixed in with perception. And perception is always biased to some degree. Unless our mind is really calm, unless our mind is really clear and purified. And that means that we are bringing some baggage from the past with us. And we are perceiving things with that baggage in the background as conditioning that has happened in the past. And we also usually kind of project into the future. And projection into the future very often is connected with anxiety or with kind of fear as well, what might happen. And that also colors what we are hearing, what we're seeing, tasting, smelling, and touching. So just to be aware of that. And also when we have these experiences that come into us, come into our minds, what they usually do is they evoke some things. And the things that they mostly evoke are feelings or memories even. One of the things that I didn't mention last time because I didn't have time is with smell. Memories are usually very kind of embedded with smells, because that's one of our senses that has developed early in our lives, and we actually smell our mothers, our fathers, our caregivers before we even see them and touch them. So it's a sense which is very kind of deep, embedded in our minds and in our hearts. And I do recall when my mom passed away, and I was looking after her. And I was, afterwards also taking care of her belongings and kind of having to clear out the room in the nursing home where she lived. And the smell was still there. And that evoked feelings in me. So that was one very kind of poignant thing that I remember. Because, anyway, that's just what I wanted to mention about smells. But then not just memories, but also images. And then the other thing that comes up is the whole world of scenarios, of stories, of moods, and of mind states. And that usually has to do with the future that I talked about before. So we kind of project into the future. And the brain is kind of like a prediction machine. And it's helpful in most cases, but sometimes the predictions are just really off. And we're starting to create things in our minds that are absolutely not, in touch with reality or what is happening outside. So we have to be a bit careful there. But with the senses coming in, with the mind and with cognition, what happens is we actually create our own world. So even two people in the same situation, having the same sense inputs, will interpret them in very, very different ways. So we create our own world and our own individual experience. So today it's hearing and cognition. So before I go further, I just want to read out what I found on Wikipedia because it is actually very nicely summarized. So cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. It encompasses all aspects of intellectual functions and processes such as perception, that I've talked about a little bit already, attention, that's an important one. Where do we put our attention? That is important. I'll talk about that afterwards. Then the thoughts, the imagination that I touched on a little bit, intelligence, the formation of knowledge, memory, working memory, judgment and evaluation, reasoning and computation, problem solving and decision making, comprehension and production of language. So our mind and cognition is actually something really, really important. As we can see from this summary, it does so many things. So that's why it's crucial that we take care of it and kind of guide it in the right direction. So, in order to see things clearly, according to reality, we need to have a calm, settled and purified mind. So that is not just the seeing, that is all other 5 senses or 6 senses actually there as well. So that's why we actually need the practice of meditation and the teachings, because they will help us with that. So they will calm our reactivity, because reactivity will create things or put things on top of what we are actually experiencing. And very often, wreak havoc and make a problem out of things which probably aren't such a big problem. I'm not saying there is no problems out there, but we have to be careful how much we add. So what we are trying to achieve is to calm the senses, and in other words, that means to smooth things, to make them even, to harmonize, and to make sure we don't get excited or we get aggravated. I really kind of like the word harmony because it has to do with music. So if there is a tone out there, or if there is a noise out there, or something out there, now we can either create a dissonance with whatever is out there, or we can create a tone which kind of tunes in with what is happening out there and create harmony. So I'll probably go a little bit more into this with the examples that I've thought of. All right, so let's turn to hearing now and how we can work with hearing, and that will apply to all the other senses as well. So Ajahn Chah was the teacher of my teacher, who was a forest master in Thailand, and Ajahn Brahm, my teacher, lived with him for 9 years. So they lived in the jungle in simple huts, but close to the village. As Ariel was saying, we are dependent on the lay people to bring us some food, so that works quite well in Asia because it's an established practice. But being close to the village has the advantage that you get food and that it's not too difficult for the people to come, and that's actually good with kusala as well. We are not as far away, so more people can come. But the disadvantage of that is that the noise and that whatever is produced in those villages, especially when they have all-night parties. And apparently Ajahn Brahm said there is this one occasion, or well, several occasions, but one occasion that really kind of stuck out, where they had one of those party and it just carried on, for 3 nights in a row. And the monks, they get up in Thailand at 3 o'clock to go to the morning meeting at 3:30. And that's kind of when the party finished. So they're like, oh, come on, give us at least 1 or 2 hours to have a bit of sleep. So they felt, okay, when we go to our teacher and we explain it, they respect Ajahn Chah a lot. So he will tell the villagers and, they'll give us at least a couple of hours sleep. Well, how wrong could they be? So they went up to Ajahn Chah and complained and said, look, yeah, this is a bit too much. Can we do something about this? And that's when this one-liner from Ajahn Chah came, and he said, it's not the noise that disturbs you. It's you who disturb the noise. So, how can we understand this? And that's when I wanted to kind of bring in some examples from my own life as well. But let me see what I had there. So, I'm trying to paraphrase, or I'm trying to explain a little bit what that might mean. So, Ajahn Chah is saying, if we give a sound importance, if we give it prominence, if we give it salience, that's the word that kind of came up to me, so I looked it up again, and basically the salience is the quality of sticking out. Something is sticking out. So, that's what makes us disturbed inside. That's what kind of shakes us. So is it somehow possible to make sure that that salience, that sticking out, can be smoothed out, as I described before? So how could we do that? Or actually, first of all, why is this salience created? Or why do we create more? Why do we amplify it? Because we resist, because we object, because we oppose, and that actually gives it more importance than it deserves. So we are elevating what is happening, we are exaggerating, and we're amplifying it. So that is the biggest cause of the disturbance there, not the sound itself. So what Ajahn Chah is pointing to is that the sound is actually nature. There'll always be sounds out there. I do agree that some sounds are more jarring and more difficult than other sounds, but actually it's just sound. And our bodies and minds are actually just nature too. It really depends how we kind of look at it. And that's in Buddhism when we start to talk about the concepts of me, mine, and myself. So if I'm different from what is happening outside, then this kind of dissonance starts to happen. So the focal point and the reference point, that is one thing which is very important that I hopefully can talk a little bit more about, because that is what creates disagreement. That's what creates the disharmony. That's what creates the disturbance in our own minds and in our own hearts. So we attend to something which basically increases defilements in our own hearts, in our own minds. And that is what agitates things, and that is what creates turmoil. Okay, so, but how can we shift this? So the story I have when I was a layperson, I was a primary school teacher, and I just came off primary school teaching school, and I lived in a flat with 4 other people. There were 5 of us. It was actually a four, do you call it 4-bedroom? No, a 4-piece, 4-room apartment. So how do you fit 5 people in there? It was a very old apartment. So we put one of those very thin walls in one of those big rooms because they were huge. I mean, we didn't need such a huge room. So I was in one part of that room, and my friend was in the other part of that room. And what happened one night is, or one evening, she had her boyfriend over, and I was lying in my bed, and I was hearing them talking. And I was like, I don't want to intrude on what they are talking about. And that's when I could actually practice this thing, to make sure that the salience of what is being spoken doesn't stick out so much. And how do you do that? I can just bring up some examples to try and describe how it happens. So if there is a song on the radio, for example, and that song is in a foreign language, do you pay the same attention to it? Do you get sucked into it in the same way? No, you don't, because you don't actually understand. I mean, there is the music, and then there is just like gibbery-gibbery-dee-dee-doo-doo, whatever. So because of that, it doesn't create a story. It doesn't create something that captures you. It doesn't create something you can disagree with, or you can even agree with. It's just kind of there in the background. So that's one way of explaining it. The other way of explaining it is when we take nature sounds. I know nature sounds by themselves have a certain smoothness, have a certain kind of like, unless it's like really heavy wind and a thunderstorm out there where you have lightning and it goes boom, 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 boom every now and then. But even with that, you can kind of have that move into the background. And when you manage to do that, you kind of move away from it. You take the salience away from it. You take the jarringness, you take the problem out of it. And with that instance, I actually managed to have their voices be a gibberish in the background, like that music or like a nature sound. And that way, I was able to kind of, tune into, not taking it personally, not making a story out of it, and at the same time, tune out of it, get a certain distance, and be able to calm everything down. But maybe that's also because of my conditioning. I usually tell people that my father was a very heavy snorer. And I didn't live with him all the time because my parents separated quite early. But I still had some practice to get used to it. And that way I was able to learn this skill of having things go into the background, smoothing them out, or just, somehow take their salience away. So when I was 18, for example, I was an exchange student in New Zealand, and my father came to visit me, and we met in Bora Bora because that was one of his kind of bucket list items to go there. And we were in one hotel room together. I mean, he was right next to me. And I know that some people say that they usually just, I want to make myself just so tired that when I go to bed, I get to sleep earlier than whoever is snoring next to me. But sometimes that doesn't work, isn't it? Or you wake up. And then it's really the question, how do you relate to that sound? And how do you manage to kind of create a harmony, even though it might be dissonant in some sense? And that's,
Earplugs.
Well, sure. If you have earplugs, if you have opportunities to try these things, great. But I encourage you to sometimes play with this concept and try it out and learn how it works, because it will be very, very helpful. Because there is situations where you just can't. I mean, with your partner, you can have an agreement that, you kind of poke them if it gets a bit too much and they turn, whatever, and then they snore a little bit less. So I'm not saying don't do anything if you can't do anything, but there is situations. And the other situation that I recall is when I was a temporary monk in India for the first time, and that monastery is in Bangalore. And it used to be outside Bangalore when they gave the piece of land, but when I was there, it was smack bang in the middle of Bangalore. And you have planes going over, you have rickshaws going out, you have, every sound, and there were smells as well because they're doing building work. And, in India doesn't sleep. They would bring in, because it was cool or because they had time, I don't know what it was, they would bring in the pipes for the concrete. And it was steel pipes, so they had to bang them together at 2 o'clock at night time. I was like, well, what is this? So anyway, with time, you can kind of practice these things. And I hope that is something you're willing to try and apply in your lives and use. And that is something which actually applies not just to the sense of hearing, but I use this as an example. One thing I just want to smuggle in there, maybe not so much for this group, but also for the recording mainly. So Ajahn Brahm very often tells a story that he attributes to me about snoring. And the story goes that a monk had a brother visit Bodhinyana monastery, and because there wasn't enough room, the brother slept in the little hut with that monk, and he was a snorer. And the story goes that the monk was able to listen to the snoring, and his way of dealing with it was imagining that it is this absolutely state-of-the-art, bleeding-edge, new kind of music. And he really kind of got into that. And that way he wouldn't oppose it. That way he would just welcome it, and he would just, accept it and let it, what I was describing, go in the background. And then Ajahn Brahm usually says, and this was Bodhidhaja. And that's not correct. So as you can hear, there is some stories with snoring. So probably what happened is that he conflated two stories together. So it's true that Venerable Nito's brother came and stayed in his kuti. So that's probably what happened there. But he might remember something that I have mentioned to you now and shared. So I don't mind. It's okay. But I just wanted to once kind of put a clarification out there that it is two separate stories. And but both of them work. It worked for him and it works for me. All right. Very good. So that's all the stories I have there. Anyway, maybe one more story if you don't mind, which also applies a little bit into the hearing and the senses, and especially how we over-exaggerate something. So my brother came to Australia for the first time. I think it was around 2014 or something like that. He was in Korea with his wife, and I had enough miles at that time, so I was able to kind of shout him a ticket down to Australia and back to Korea. So he came over. He also attended a 9-day retreat at Jhana Grove, our retreat center over in Serpentine. But he arrived in Australia, and he's never been in Australia. And, you hear all those horror stories of all the poisonous animals in Australia that are just around every corner trying to kill you. So he kind of came in a little bit, probably with that background idea in his mind. And he also told me afterwards, it was a little bit like camping. I mean, he didn't camp out in the forest in a tent, but the rooms we have in the monastery are fairly simple. So it reminded him of that. So he came, I think it was afternoon or evening, so I showed him into his room, and maybe had a similar bit of jet lag or something. So he took out his book, he started reading with the light on, with the shutters on the window still open, and it was the wet season. And we had the Portuguese millipedes. And probably most of you are familiar with them. There's so many of them. And the trouble is, when they see light, they're attracted by the light. So he was reading, not knowing, he had the windows closed, but they find the gaps. So they were streaming into the room and onto the walls and everything. And so when he switched off his light to go asleep, they were like everywhere. And he was lying in his bed going like, they might be poisonous. And then every now and then, one of them would, from up on the wall, would lose its grip and kind of fall down. He didn't sleep very well that night. So his salience for the sound of dropping those Portuguese millipedes dropping, and the possibility of them dropping on his bed and even kind of doing him harm, were there. And that's what made the whole thing worse. But the next day I explained to him, there's no problem, just don't leave your light on, you will have less. And they're absolutely harmless, they're not going to do anything to you. So that night he slept well. Because he didn't give it importance. Because he didn't feel it's something he has to be alert. It's something where he has to put his attention. And that's the attention piece that was mentioned before. So we can direct our attention to something which doesn't oppose or aggravate, but actually smooths, calms, and settles things. And that is with all the senses. And that's basically what we do in meditation. And that's kind of the segue to the next part. I think I have covered most of the things. I like to have a couple of notes, because there's sometimes a few things that I just would like to pass on. And sometimes I just can't, in the moment, say it in the best way. So that helps me a little bit. Okay. do we have any questions at this point from anything I said? Maybe there was already some dissonance happening in your minds or hearts, going like, what is he talking about? But all these things are always things to be practiced, to try out, and to see if they work. So you will have to find your own way of knowing if something is really jarring, if something is really sticking out. How can you balance it out? How can you harmonize it? How can you smooth it out? And it's this me, my, and myself. If we have that worldview, everything centers around us. We are the center of the universe. But if we are able to take that center of the universe and just move it slightly outside of us, then the world looks very different. The world feels very different. So that is kind of one way to try and explain a little bit what is happening there. And that can also happen with cognition. That can also happen with thinking. So, for example, if you're sitting in meditation afterwards and you have these thoughts arise, which is completely normal. We think all day, and when we sit down, they're not just suddenly going to stop. So now we have to make sure that, again, that we calm them, that we settle them. And one way of doing that is moving the center of the universe, moving the kind of gravity outside. So if you sit in meditation and you imagine, just for a moment, that all the thoughts that are arising are coming not from you, but from one person in this room that you don't even know. Now, is that going to change something? I think so, because you won't give it the same importance. It doesn't mean that you don't care or that you dismiss it completely. So some things that come up in your mind and in other people's minds, they're brilliant, they're beautiful, and they're things to take in and to consider and to develop and everything. But we don't give them the same seriousness. We don't give them the same salience, the same urgency, the same kind of like, me, my, and myself. It's just nature. It's just another person thought. It's like a sound happening in the forest that we don't really have much control over. And are our thoughts so much different to that? Maybe if you try to use concepts like this, you will discover that it calms things down, that it detaches you, but in a good way, that it gives clarity, and that it encourages mindfulness, and that you have wisdom, and that you have humor arise, for example, as well. Humor is something which always creates distance. You can't have humor without being you can't have humor while being completely enmeshed into something. So humor is actually another tool that my teacher Ajahn Brahm uses a lot and very skillfully. Anyway, I think I've said a lot tonight already, but I hope that's useful. Let's do some meditation together and try if we can use some of those things that I mentioned with whatever will be arising in our bodies and in our minds, or also in the world out there. There is some sound. There will be more sounds as we go along. So try it and see what happens. Okay, so please settle in, get a sip of water if you like to cool you down a little bit. And find a way which is comfortable for you to sit. Because it's the same thing with the body. If something is really jarring, if something is really salient, again, I think salience is one of those words which will come up again and again tonight. If we can take that salience away, even just with shifting a little bit, with being a little bit kind, with giving our body a bit space, letting it be, not getting involved in it so much, then that might kind of flatten and smooth those waves that are kind of sticking out. So just take a little bit of time in the beginning of the meditation to do that. to feel into your body, to connect with your body, to connect with your senses. That has two advantages. One is you are in the present moment, because what you feel, what's coming in through your senses, without a story, without opposing, without all that other stuff, is always happening now. And the other thing is it gives you a little bit of feedback what's going on. And as you feel into your body, and as you feel into your mind, the more skilled you are, the more you realize how it can oppose things, how it can push against things, how it can be pulled by things. And anything we can do to loosen that up a little bit, so that relationship is not as close, as into your face. There is a gap, there is a distance. There is perspective. So we try to help the body and the mind to relax as much as possible. And when we focus or direct our mind to one simple thing, then that will create energy as well, interest. Wakefulness. This quality of caring, of contentment, of basically wanting to be here and now. In our immediate experience. Without stories and judgments. Without being in charge. But also not without caring. So we're just like a friend who's present, who's listening, and who responds in a kind and caring way that creates harmony, that entangles things. That finds a way to balance. And then if we need a bit of wakefulness, it's usually nice to go through the body from the bottom up. starting with our feet, checking in with the feet, allowing them to be grounded, to be spread out, to be supported. To be at ease. To be relaxed, tingly, and present and awake. And then we can move this energy of just looking on with kindness and with care upwards to our ankles, all the way up to our knees, and if the knees are screaming, let us just hold them like a child. Listen. Try to feel and understand why they scream. But know that it's just nature. And see if we can accept it. We can be with it. We cannot make it worse and wish our knees and our thighs well. Feeling our buttocks, allowing them to be, to relax, to wake up, to be fresh and crisp and alert, but without effort. Feeling our hips, the belly, the lower back, allowing our spine to unfurl just like a plant that is growing towards the light. Rooted in the ground, nourished through kindness and care. And then it just kind of unfolds naturally, opens up naturally. And brings out its branches and its leaves to absorb the goodness of relaxation, of stillness, of peace, the warmth of kindness, awareness, like the leaves of a tree take in the sunlight and make basically sweet sugar out of it, which is energy. So allow your chest to open up, your shoulders to be at ease, but energized and open. Reaching outwards naturally. And then the arms are like the extension of further branches going out and down, supported by the trunk, held by the trunk, but flexible in the wind, whatever might come at us in terms of sense, impressions, sensations, thoughts, scenarios. The leaves and the branches, they just kind of sway in that wind. Flexible and at ease. They might even enjoy that kind of breeze. Instead of being rigid and opposing it, we just flow with it. And let the energy they carry, which might carry us out and away, to kind of get diverted and to get calmed down eventually. Feeling your hands and your fingers and your palms and the backs of the hands. Resting, tingly, awake, at ease. And then you can stretch your neck by pulling your chin just down a little bit towards your chest. Nice stretch. And then you can let that go to a natural position that feels at ease. Relaxing the upper part of your spine. Relaxing your throat. Your jaw. Your mouth. Your eyes. And your whole face. Eyebrows, your temples, your forehead. And then the rest of your head, of your skull, the ears, the top of the head, the back of the head. Relaxing the scalp. And if there is anything which is kind of sticking out, see if you can allow it to create a few ripples and a few waves. But if you don't interfere, you don't make it stronger, they will just kind of teeter out. Like when you throw a stone into a pond, and it creates circular waves. But just naturally calm down, become less and less. Allowing the lake to become like a mirror. Reflecting, knowing what's going on, but not being perturbed by it, not being shaken by it. not being moved by it. And if there is still some movement, just let it be this little blip here and there that will return to the natural state of that lake, that body of water, to just be resting. Clear, crisp, aware, awake, but still and peaceful. And then you can give space and get really into just being this clear, calm, still forest pool. Having whatever comes past, just go past. The animals, the sounds, the wind, the leaves. Letting nature do its thing. And then you can just stay with that peace, that calm and that clarity. Sink deeper into it. Or allow your awareness to gently, kindly hang out and settle onto the process of breathing. Knowing when the air is coming in, when there is a little pause, and then when it's flowing out again. And then flowing in again after a little pause. Just watching. Just knowing. Just flowing along. With the natural rhythm of the air coming in, and then eventually flowing out again. giving yourself fully to that natural process. Allowing yourself to get immersed into something which is peaceful. Which brings relaxation, joy, ease, and peace. Being nature, being a part of nature, not wanting to stick out, to be otherwise. To be apart, but rather to be a part of. And then as we turn around on our journey of meditation, and slowly make our way back to the body, to the senses, feel how it is now in the present moment. Understand what has changed and why. Learn how some of those big waves can just be allowed to be kind of ridden out, so that the energy doesn't build up and create something bigger and stronger, but that it teeters out until it finds some sort of equilibrium of balance. And then you can allow your sense of hearing through the ringing of the meditation bell, the singing bowl, to slowly and gently bring you out of meditation. It's good timing.
It was on silent, but it wasn't alarm.
That's all right. Well, it's the alarm to come out of meditation and to be alert, awake and relaxed. And hopefully, if we were able to understand to some degree and practice to some degree what I was just saying before, that sound didn't get into us as much as it would otherwise and disturb things. It's like, oh, there we go. I have another clock that I usually bring, and this is funny. How do you switch this off? This has never happened to me before either. There we go. Yay! I usually bring this clock because the small one we have I can't see when all the lights are out and when it's not summertime. But now I have a big clock there. This is funny. That's nice. Anyway, so I just wanted to just mention the heat here as well. So now, when hopefully our mind is a little bit settled, a little bit clearer, a little bit calmer, a little bit less reactive, we might still be able to feel the heat, but it just doesn't burn or pierce the same way. I mean, I must admit we had the aircon on, so probably that did quite a bit of work too, so I don't want to attribute it to things that it might not deserve to be attributed to, but I think you get the idea. And so please play with this idea, and please play with it with the different senses, and make sure that when you do, that you don't challenge yourself too much. So if you do have a situation that is really difficult with whatever sense it might be, it just evokes really strong imagery and feelings and emotions, don't necessarily practice with that in the beginning. So use something which is simple, which is manageable, and then try to apply it to other things as you go along, and as you become stronger internally, to be able to deal with these things that impinge on the mind, to make sure that they don't create tsunamis, but that they create blips, and that those blips kind of even out if we are patient and if we relate in the right way. Okay. Is there any questions, any comments, anything anyone wants to share about the meditation we just did? Yeah?
This sort of like, is it just being kind to whatever's, having kind thoughts to whatever's annoying you? Or?
That is one way of relating to it, yes. So, it's like the harmony that I described before. You know, if someone has something which is really sharp, and you bring something which is firm, and they come together, they create a problem. They create hurt. But if you have something which is sharp, and you manage to bring something which is soft and malleable, like water, for example, that can't be stabbed, or you bring something which is guiding it in a way, like you have a knife and you have a shaft that knife goes in or something, it doesn't create the same thing. And kindness is one of those magical ingredients that has the ability to adapt and harmonize with whatever is coming your way. But of course, there is moments that I've mentioned before, when there is something happening in your office, when there is something happening in your relationship or whatever, and it's happening again and again, and it's a problem, then there is nothing wrong with approaching it, with voicing it, with saying what is okay and what is not okay. But you want to go into that friendly discussion, if I might call it this, or feedback, without having that hardness and that resentment and that kind of like, which basically kind of almost like punches back at whatever is punching at you. And that's not going to solve the problem, is it? But sometimes you have to be firm to a certain degree and form something or inform something. And that's one of the things that people often get really confused about. And the most beautiful simile that I have found is the simile of the potter. And you have a piece of clay, and your aim is to form that piece of clay into something. So when we teach, or when we have a relationship or a workplace, we sometimes need to engage to form a relationship, to form the culture, to form the environment that we are living in. So you do that with two things. You do it with your fist, but you also do it with your palm. And these are the two things that come together and form the clay. If you just hit it, you destroy it. And it doesn't create any nice shape. You're not forming something, you're basically destructive, you're destroying something. But if you have the right motivation, the right ideas, the feedback, that sometimes the boundaries that need to be put in place, but you also have the kindness and the care, on the other hand, that softens it, that meets it, that brings the qualities together that are necessary, then something beautiful can be formed out of this. Yeah. I mean, did that kind of answer the question, or did I just go on a tangent?
It's like a balance.
Yes, and the kindness is something you can learn and experience with your own body. So if you're kind to your body, if you allow it to be, if you give it space, if you ask it questions, if you try to respond in a way that it is friendly, then you will notice that it relaxes. You will notice that it kind of smooths out, that whatever was sticking out before is kind of like sanded away. Sometimes it takes longer. So it's not this just, whatever, something sticks out and then it's not there anymore, but you're feeling you're going in the right direction. And that kind of relationship that we practice in meditation, that we practice through understanding the teachings, then is applied to all other things as well, to our senses, to our experience in the world, to how we interact with our bodies, with our minds, and with other bodies and other minds, and with nature. So sometimes, as I said before, we personalize things. So if we could see our own body and our own mind, and the body and the mind of another person like the weather, then we would relate to them in a very different way. Because it's not personal. It's just causes and conditions that have created an environment that creates a storm. That we have to sometimes, shelter or get away from if it's happening, because it's insane, it's out of control. But it's not the weather which has a mind which wants to come and hurt us. And if we have that understanding, that we are nature, and that things happening out there are nature, in most cases, people don't really have it in for us. They're just trying to survive, or they have some kind of conditioning from the past, some survival mechanisms that are unhelpful or unhealthy. So, we try to learn and then apply. And meditation is a safe space to experiment and to see what happens. And then we can gradually apply it in other areas of our lives and see if the experiment works there in the same way. Okay. Anything else? Okay, wonderful. So keep cool. Not just because of the weather, but also inside. What I was describing is a certain coolness that we can develop and that we can learn not to lose so easily. And if there is heat out there and there's enough cool inside, then it becomes bearable. Then it kind of like mixes with each other and becomes a workable temperature. And I think that's what relationships and life is kind of all about.